Hello and welcome to Fulham Fan News. My name is Tom, and tonight I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Evans from Mail Sport and South London Press, as well as other things. Dan, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, no problem. Dan was in place at Craven Cottage on Saturday to take in, well, I don't want to say the great game against Luton, but the game against Luton anyway. Must have been a bit of a tough watch at times for Dan, but as it was for all Fulham fans, I expect. But eventually, Fulham got the job done somehow against Luton's low block. Although there were some scares along the way as well, where Luton hit the post, a couple of other things that went on in the game. We'll talk about that with Dan in a moment. Um, but overall, Fulham managed to pick up 3 points, so we have to be happy with our start to the season. 7 points so far, after quite a tough summer, let's put it that way. So we'll talk about the game today, Dan. Obviously, you were there. How was the atmosphere? Did it was it a good atmosphere at Craven Cottage on Saturday?
Yeah, I think so. I think the weather definitely helped. It was obviously a really warm afternoon, and it was nice to have the Premier League back after the international breaks. It's always a bit of a sort of excitement to get going again. I think you sort of sense that around the ground. Obviously, you had the tributes for Mohamed Al Fayed before the game, and that definitely got the crowd going a bit to start with. And then it became a bit of a frustrating afternoon with how the game played out. So I think it started well, it became frustrating, and then it ended well as well. So it was a nice afternoon overall.
Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, the tributes for Alfred were brilliant. I saw a lot of banners in the Hammersmith end especially. There were a few things on social media afterwards about Luton not respecting the minute silence that Fulham had. Um, I think it was just a minority of people, so I don't want to tarnish them too much with that. Um, but yeah, like you say, overall frustrating became good in the end. How did you see the game uh, as it panned out?
Yeah, like I'm saying, I think frustrating was the key word up until the Carlos Vinicius goal. It did seem like it was going to be one of those days where it just wasn't going to happen for Fulham. It even seemed like Luton might be able to nick a win with how they were counter-attacking and the sort of threat they posed. So I think Fulham they started brightly, they started on the front foot, but it then became a problem of trying to break Luton down. I think that was a bit of a different test to what this Fulham side have been used to over the last year in the Premier League. I think Marco Silva alluded to that after the game as well. I think Luton even changed their formation. They normally play with two strikers, but they played with four in midfield and just one up front. And that just meant it was impossible to get sort of the ball between the lines, get it into dangerous areas. And that sort of showed in the stats. The Fulham only had two shots on target, I think, overall in the game. One of those was a free kick from Harry Wilson from miles out, and one was the goal. So, yeah, it definitely wasn't one for the purists. It wasn't. I think it was last on Match of the Day as well. So I think that tells you everything. But a good 3 points, I think, an important win because I think if Fulham are going to repeat what they did last season, if they're going to stay away from relegation worries, then beating the sides that you'd expect to be down there, especially at home, is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on obviously frustration there and only having two shots on target. I think a lot of people jumped on that after the game, and a lot of people from around the footballing world were saying, "Oh, Fulham just about got the job done." But I think a lot of teams are going to find it hard against Luton to break them down. I do find I was watching the game and I was thinking, how are we going to get past six defenders and then two holding midfielders? And they've just got Carlton Morris up front. I think it was Chong in the first half who was, he's quite quick. So when they got out quickly, and they do throw people forward on the counter attack. So credit to them for that. But I think if they approach every game like that, they're going to struggle to come away with wins. They might pick up the odd draw here and there, but from Fulham's point of view, I really did think it was going to be one of those games where we didn't break them down. And I mean, obviously, in the past, Fulham have had trouble breaking down sides that put that low block in front of them. They need that spark, and I think that spark came when the substitutions were made. I mean, poor Raul Jimenez, he didn't have a sniff in the first half. And I think most of the time he was playing with his back to goal, which, there was no one running beyond him. So yeah, I do feel for him. He did struggle, but when the changes happened, I think they happened at the right time, and because I thought Luton were tiring a bit and they weren't chasing as much as they were, and I think when we saw Iwobi and Carlos Vinicius come on, Vinicius straight away was looking to get in behind. So straight away, stretching the game, and Iwobi was finding pockets. And I think for that first, I think it took him 3 minutes to score the goal, but I think for about 5 or 10 minutes, Fulham really could have had two goals in that time. Um, I know it was a bit, contentious whether Iwobi handled the ball or not, but I think with the amount of bad things that have happened to Fulham in obviously for every Fulham fan's eyes, these the last few weeks they'll take one at least. um, but yeah, I think overall, like you say, it was a frustrating game, but a good end to the game. Going forward, though, talking about Jimenez and Vinicius, I think a lot of Fulham fans, it's not going to be good for Jimenez because I think the goal came from a mistake. Let's face it, the goalkeeper should have probably have done a lot better, and Vinicius has stuck it away. If Jimenez is in that position, he's probably going to score as well, right? So going forward, where do you think Marco should go next? Does he start with Jimenez like he has done, or does he now turn to Vinicius, who does seem to be a bit more, I don't know what the word is, but he understands the way Fulham play a little bit more at the moment than Jimenez does.
Yeah, I think it is a really tough decision to make. I think it sort of underlined Jimenez's frustrating afternoon that the goal came so quickly after he'd gone off, and it was the guy who replaced him who scored. I think it wasn't like he wasn't involved. Well, he wasn't involved, but it wasn't like he wasn't trying to be involved. He had a difficult afternoon. Fulham had Luton, sorry, had three giant centre backs who sort of marked him out of every opportunity. There was no space for him to work with. You could see in the first half he was trying to sort of link with Pereira, make movements in behind, but there was just no space to go anywhere. There was no way he could play these sort of 1-2s to get him into dangerous areas. And at the moment, he just really looks like someone who desperately needs a goal. I think a lot of people feel sort of support for him, especially after that horrible injury he had towards the end of his time at Wolves. Like, people want to see him do well, I think. And Marco Silva obviously is sort of backing him. He's been the main guy so far this season. He started all of the Premier League games. Vinicius hasn't been involved until Saturday, so that makes it seem like it wouldn't be an obvious switch to just now bring in Vinicius just because he scored a goal. And but I do think he caused more problems when he came on. Like you're saying, he sort of broke the game up a bit more, trying to run in behind. He's a bit more of like a chaos factor than Jimenez. It's a bit hard to know what he's going to do, which makes him a problem for defenders. But I think also when you're a manager, you don't always want a striker like that. You want someone who's a bit more like Jimenez, a bit like more like Mitrovic, I guess, who you know what they're all about. You know what you're going to get from them. Whereas I'm not sure we're quite there with Vinicius. Maybe if he gets a run of games now, we'll have a better understanding of him. But again, I would still expect Jimenez to play at Palace at the weekend just because he's been the main guy so far this season, and we've barely seen Vinicius feature until the weekend.
Yeah, I think that might upset a few Fulham fans. I've seen a lot of clamour for him to get the start now.
Yeah.
Also, his goals to game ratio is pretty good. I think he's actually a bit maybe better than Mitrovic's was. So, obviously I know he hasn't played anywhere near as many games, but in the Premier League last season. So, yeah, I mean, it's a really tough decision, but it's one I think that Marco has to make, the right decision in his mind. And I think, like you, that he's chosen Jimenez at the start of this season for a reason. And I believe that Jimenez will come good in the end. My opinion is that he wants someone who's going to do what Mitrovic did essentially and hold the ball, bring players into the game. Like you say, Vinicius sometimes can do that. Sometimes he just runs around like a headless chicken. But at the weekend, he just seemed to be in the right place at the right time, and he just looked that little bit sharper. I think the word is sharper than Jimenez. One thing a lot of people didn't pick up on is that Jimenez returned from international duty on Thursday, had one day of rest, and then played on Saturday. So, maybe that played a factor in why he wasn't, getting as involved as he would normally. Because I thought against Arsenal, Everton, Man City, I thought he was really good, especially in the first half against Man City. I thought he held the ball very well for us when we did get out. He had, I think he hit the post against Everton. He had that bicycle kick against Arsenal that went just wide. And I think it was his shot from the corner that Tim Ream scored from against Man City. So he is having an impact, but obviously he's a striker. He hasn't scored a Premier League goal for over a year. And that's the only factor that people are looking at right now is when is this guy going to score a goal? I agree with you. When he gets that goal, that will boost his confidence. I think that you can see it at the moment. He just needs a goal. And obviously I'm rooting for him because, like everyone said, he's had that bad injury. Um, just touching on a few of the debuts on the day, I thought Timothy Castagna was brilliant at left back. Um, he's obviously predominantly right-footed, would prefer to play at right back. But in my eyes, I think Fulham have one of the best right backs in the league in Kenny Tete. So, especially defensively. So to play left back, I think Castagna was brilliant, to be honest, especially against some real tough opposition in the big strikers that Luton have. Um, and Iwobi as well, who came on and in my mind changed the game a little bit, getting into the pockets, carrying the ball, committing defenders. So how did you see the debutants?
Yeah, I completely agree with you on Castagna, especially. I thought he was really solid. He mopped up a few counter attacks that sort of Luton when they did break in that first half. Castagna always seemed to be the one who was in the right place at the right time to snuff any danger out. I think it is also quite interesting that he sort of plays left back a bit differently to Anthony Robinson. He doesn't really bomb on, get into the box all the time. He sort of held his position, and that allowed Willian to get 1v1 with the wing back quite often. And if you look at the goal, that's essentially where that comes from, right? Like Willian beats the wing back, gets the cross in. Obviously, it's a bit fortunate with the mistake. But I think it's a different sort of option to Anthony Robinson. I think he's a fan's favourite really at the moment, isn't he, Robinson? The way he gets forward, he's always involved in attacks. But Castagna is a nice alternative to have, and the fact that he can play on both sides definitely makes him a valuable squad option, if nothing else. And then Iwobi, I really love this Iwobi signing. I know it's quite a lot of money, and he's maybe someone who's flattered to deceive a bit over his Premier League career towards the end of his time at Arsenal with Everton. But I think Marco Silva's obviously a coach who trusts him a lot. He brought him to Everton, he's now brought him to Fulham, and he can play lots of different positions. Like we saw at the weekend, comes on as sort of a central midfielder to provide a more attacking option in there instead of Harrison Reed. But he could also play as the number 10 instead of Pereira, or he could play on either wing. And the way he sort of collects the ball, drives through the midfield, that's what sets up the goal, what sets up Willian to set up the goal. So, yeah, I think it was a great sort of cameo for Iwobi, and it's really exciting to see what he can do if he starts regularly in this team. The more minutes he gets under his belt, the more accustomed he gets to his teammates. I think he could be a real star for Fulham this season.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, especially on Iwobi. I think a lot of Fulham fans are quite excited. Again, like you said, the price tag was a bit high, but I think the market is a bit inflated at the moment, and I think you might have to pay that little bit extra to get the player you want. I do believe Marco Silva really wanted Iwobi, like you say, because he took him to Everton as well. I think the type of player he is, he's very versatile, like you say, and he is going to cause trouble because he's going to carry the ball and he's going to bring other players into the game that way, i.e., the goal at the weekend. Just wanted to say like about the depth that Fulham have got. Obviously, I know they lost Mitrovic, but defensively they've strengthened, in my opinion, quite significantly with both Calvin Bassey and Timothy Castagna coming in. Ballo-Touré, if he can recover the form that he had at Monaco before he went to Milan, I don't know if you know much about him, but he was a very good attacking left back, and it's going to be interesting to see what he can do in a Fulham shirt. But I think both defensively and in the midfield, Fulham have strengthened quite well, significantly. In fact, there's a lot more depth, especially in the central midfield. You've got Iwobi, you've got Lukic, Kearney, Pereira, Palhinha, Reed. Bobby Reed, who can play absolutely anywhere on the park. He's just like a Swiss Army knife. You chuck him a left back, right back, centre back, wherever you want. Um, so I think Marco is looking at versatility as the key to Fulham's season. Obviously, the only area, the big gaping hole that everyone talks about is up front. Who's going to get the goals? So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. But I do think more goals will come from midfield just by the way he's changing the way we play, bringing in, being able to bring players off the bench that are of Premier League quality as well. Adama Traore was another one that was missing at the weekend, who I think if Fulham had in the team, would have been a completely different option to bring off the bench, and he'd just pump a few long balls and he'd just chase. So yeah, I think I'm quite excited, to be honest, by the depth that Fulham have. If we can look to the right option in January, get a decent striker in January, maybe, someone who's going to get us 10, 15 goals, it could be another mid-table decent finish in the Premier League, to be honest. Moving on to Crystal Palace at the weekend, obviously Roy Hodgson was missing from the Palace game this weekend just gone, but the news is that he's fine, he's back taking training, and he will be in the dugout for the weekend. So obviously we're glad for that, because we're, as Fulham fans, we absolutely love Roy. So I think it's going to be a really tough game for Fulham against Palace. They had a decent start, and I think they're on 7 points as well. I think they're on the same amount of points as us, but I think they've had a really decent start. And even though they've lost Zaha, they don't seem to be too affected by that. I know Elise's out injured, and when he comes back, he'll be a key part of their team. Eze seems to have stepped up to take over the Zaha mantle. And Odsonne Edouard, who I rate quite highly as a striker, seems to be finding his feet as their main striker. So, how do you see the game at the weekend going with Fulham?
I think it'll be another tough one, like you say. I think Palace are going well at the moment. They look quite similar to Fulham. I think they're quite solid, and they're bringing more elements into their attacking play. Like they're obviously adjusting to the loss of Zaha, like you say. And Edward has started the season quite well. I think he's someone that a lot of people wrote off over the last couple of seasons as maybe not quite good enough to lead the line for a Premier League team. He's got a few goals under his belt, and he's looking every bit the Premier League striker at the moment. So yeah, I do think it'd be another tough one. It's another one that I don't think will be towards the start of match of the day. I think it'll be a bit of a tough grind, not many goals in it. But again, if it's another sort of test for this Fulham side, right? If they can go to places like Palace and pick up points, then you are thinking, oh, maybe upper mid-table is very possible again. If you go to places like Palace and get outplayed, and it all looks a bit too much for this team, then you start worrying. So again, it's another good acid test. It's really early in the season still. We can't forget that. But yeah, a tough test, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I always look at Palace as a very, like you say, very similar team to Fulham. We have similar revenue, similar size stadium. We usually finish similar areas of the table. So for me, yeah, it's a benchmark to go to them and pick up points, because it would make me think, okay, we're going to finish around where they're going to finish, and they always finish roughly, 10th to 14th. So, you know, for me, yeah, it's going to be in and around that area, I think. Like you say, I think it won't be a goal fest. You watch it, it'll be 3-3 now, but um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a really tough game for Fulham. Palace, they've got some really dangerous attacking players. I know Fulham have as well, but it's going to be. I think Fulham are actually better away from home at the moment than they are at home. I have noticed that recently, especially even towards the back end of last season. I think when we went away, I don't know if it's a pressure thing or what it is, but we just seem to be a little bit more freer with our game. Um, but if I had to put something on it, I'd probably be happy to come away from Palace with a 1-1 draw, something like that. But I'd love to see Jimenez score a goal. That would be, I think, the icing on the cake for that one. Do you have a prediction for the game at the weekend, or you don't want to sit? You want to sit on the fence for that?
No, no, I'll put my neck on the line. Don't worry. I think I'll go for a 1-1 draw as well, and I'd love a Jimenez goal. Also, maybe if I was on a Crystal Palace podcast, I'd be saying 2-1 Palace. But I think at 1-1, that's fine.
You know how to get fans. I like that. So before we go, Dan, I just want to. We do a little thing where we ask all of our guests where they think Fulham will finish. Nice little summary, really. So, how do you see Fulham's season going, and where do you think Fulham will finish?
Yeah, so predictions, I'm not an amazing predictor. They really are sort of a mug's game to me. But like we say, I've just made another prediction with that scoreline, so we might as well go for it, I guess. Like we say, we're still really early in the season, so we're trying to work out who the teams that look in trouble are, who the teams that might finish around mid-table are. And at the moment, there are definitely sides that you can see that are sorry, that are a level below Fulham. I think the newly promoted teams don't look quite up to it. Everton are struggling big time. So at the moment, I've got Fulham in 14th. I think that's fair enough. We'll see how the season progresses. It obviously depends on a lot of things. If Palhinha's still there after January, then it might look a lot better. If they sign another striker in January, it might look a lot better. But I'll go for 14th at the moment, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll have to get you back on after January window closes to get a new prediction. Yeah, so I went 13th, and the other boys on the podcast, I think one was massively optimistic. I think he went 8th or 9th, and the
Wow.
other one went 12th. But most people that we've had on the podcast, they are sitting in and around the 12th to 15th mark. So yeah, you sit perfectly in there with us. And I
That's
think,
great.
to
I'll
be
follow
honest,
the
for Fulham,
crowd.
yeah, I think, to be honest, for Fulham fans, with everything that's happened this summer, and with everything that's going on around the club, transition. Is Marco going to sign the contract? Who knows? I think at the moment we'd all be quite happily with some mid-table mediocrity. Anyway, Dan, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Um, I hope you've enjoyed being on the show for us.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you very much for having me on.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us today. We do have a partnership with FOCO UK. You can get all your merchandise, all your Fulham merchandise from FOCO UK. The link is down in the description. Please feel free to have a look. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Round and high, I live by the river.